Good afternoon, conference participants. I'm Vera Semeoshenkova. I represent Russian St. Petersburg Meteorological University, and I'd like to make a talk on integrated coastal zone management, connection with marine spatial planning and ocean. I'll give you some examples of coastal legislation management in Italy, Spain, and Portugal. I'm sorry, I inadvertently switched to English, but I'm going to use Russian. So this is the presentation outline. Let's go over the main points very quickly. The value of the coastal zone, ICZM in Russia. Then I'll cover ICZM in European Union, and we'll look into ICZM framework in Spain, Portugal, and Italy, south of Europe. Then we'll have several case studies from Portugal and Italy, where integrated coastal zone management tools have been used, and we'll look at proposals on the structure of the integrated model for the Russian Federation. First, let's look at what constitutes a coastal zone. The coastal zone is defined as a strip of land and sea of varying width, depending on the nature of the environment and management needs. So this area includes partly land and sea, which are in constant and direct interaction. Coastal zone has boundaries that are defined by the degree of interaction between land and sea, and they're separated from the offshore area itself. And it can vary in depth, width, and length. Coastal zones are very diverse, and they've always attracted people. They have drawn tourists in droves. They were significant transit points as well. So this slide demonstrates diversity of coastal zones. They could be habitats. They could offer various grounds. There are also resources, challenges, and problems, and opportunities, of course. But this level of pressure on the coastal zone leads to depletion of biodiversity, erosion, and various conflicts between different activities. It also leads to space overload. Coastal zones are also very susceptible to human pressures and climate change. Risks include flooding, erosion, rising sea level, and extreme meteorological events. And these can go a long way in terms of transforming lives of local communities. And since well-being of people and their livelihoods depend on the ecological status of such territories, it's important to use long-term tools such as ICZM to protect resources and raise efficacy of their use. So ecosystem is a robust, dynamic development of people and other species that are found there. And the quality of ecosystems determines the ability to provide ecosystem services. These are all direct and indirect benefits that humankind obtains from ecosystems. And these are food, nature, tangible and intangible services. Based on Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, such services provisioning, regulating, habitat, and cultural services. There is a combination of rational management in coastal management and ocean management. Rational coastal management is aimed at ensuring sustainable development, which is achieved by using planning and goal-setting methods in combination with monitoring system and the implementation of coastal protection measures. With regard to the coastal zone, sustainable development considered to be instrumental in economic growth, improved living standards, democratization, cultural heritage, without deteriorating ecological state of coastal territories and water areas, a decrease in the quality of human habitat and other biological species. At the heart of rational management, there are reclamation and conservation. Next chapter is ICZM. It was at the Earth Summit, which took place in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, where the adoption of agenda for 21st century took place, and chapter 17 of that document that reads protection of the oceans, all kinds of the seas, including closed, semi-enclosed, coastal areas, and the protection, rational use and development of their living resources, stated on the need for sustainable development of coastal zones. As a tool to ensure sustainable development, all countries with a sea coast were encouraged to establish integrated coastal zone management systems. The role of this conference in the development of ICZM is extremely high. So what is integrated coastal zone management, or ICZM? It represents the most widespread in world practice implementation of the idea of using integrated approaches in the management of complex natural socioeconomic systems, exemplified by the coastal zone. Processes taking place in sea and on land lead to the need to regard coastal areas as a common shared area. So it's a combination of developing adaptive environmental, economic, and social management initiatives focused on the sustainable development of the coastal zone, a modern economic and legal tool for harmonizing many conflicting interests of coastal nature users associated with the development of marine and coastal resources. Key functions are spatial planning, harmonization of relations between different coastal users, protection of coastal ecosystems, and maintenance of their sustainable functioning, ensuring general environmental safety, extension of the democratic legal field, and encouragement and support of sustainable forms of shore management. Inability to include these aspects and objectives will result in a form of unsustainable governments, undermining the paradigms that are explicit for ICZM. Key salient features of ICZM are interdepartmentality, multiple levels involved, it's intersectoral, and people, for example, could be viewed both externally and internally, and priority of strategic planning. Also, interdisciplinarity, internationality, and multi-purpose orientation. Major deficiencies in management are the predominance of spur-of-the-moment interests, often with negative socio-economic reverberations, plus fragmentation of geospatial planning due to lack of coordination between land and sea managers, between different types of activities in different communities. Then the sectoral approach to maritime activities, often decision makers are deprived of information about the values of seas as a real asset. Also, lack of personnel who are familiar with ICZM concept, who are well trained, qualified, and can implement this on the ground. Another key barrier is a lack of legislation and regulations, and reasons for inefficient use are lack of information, technological and financial capabilities, and a lack of a practical experience. All of these can lead to conflicts of interest and to a variety of modern problems, such as shore erosion, loss of habitats, disappearance, or reduction in biodiversity. And it also leads to adverse social aspects like loss of structures, no access to coastal infrastructure, and potential health and life hazards. Now let's look at ICZM in Russia. In Russia, ICZM is performed at a national level, but there is no legislation that would construe it as something common and shared in terms of geospatial approach. Any provisions relating to ICZM are fragmented and scattered all over legislation, different sectors of legislation. Bits and pieces can be found in the geographic laws or state border laws and so on. So it's important to formulate common theory for ICZM and to see interlinkages with other disciplines. And development of such key definitions should ensure exchange of information and creation of mechanisms for effective use and planning based on clarity of goals and objectives involved in this highly complex system. It is necessary to develop key terms and definitions, especially now as this area is becoming increasingly popular. A number of governmental regulations cover the need for further development in this field. The new edition of the strategy for development of maritime activities seeks to further shore up Russian interests in the field of maritime activities. And there are strategic goals and objectives for other types of maritime activities. So the strategy until 2030 uses one of the strategic goals as transition to integrated approach in planning of coastal zones and water area in specific parts of the country.
And the strategical goal for that are the comprehensive management programs for maritime and coastal areas. But unfortunately, I have to note that yes, indeed, Russia is one of the few countries in Europe and the only country of the Baltic Sea area which doesn't have its own independent, dedicated legislation on the matter, as a result of which the transition economy of the country is suffering from the lack of such an important piece of law for the coastal areas of Russia. Let us look now at the ICZM legislation in the European Union, two basic documents of the EU, which are recommended by the Integrated Coastal Zone Management. They include the model law on the Integrated Coastal Zone Management and the Code of Conduct. The model law was adopted as early as in 1998, and the main purpose of this model law is the text that can be used for the further legal improvement of the national legislation. It doesn't have the status of international convention. The country is not obliged to follow it, but they can play an important role when developing coastal management laws, considering the national peculiarities. And the purpose of the model law at the intergovernmental level to develop and implement and enforce the integrated coastal zone management coastal zone management practices. And it is used as a basis for the development of national legislation and bylaws for the integrated coastal zone management. Ever since 1995, the Mediterranean Action Plan was adopted, the first ever plan under the UNEP program. Next, an important event was the Barcelona Convention, which requires from the contracting parties to contribute to the comprehensive coastal zone management, understanding and taking into consideration the landscape and environmental value and rational use of natural resources. And a special protocol was developed, which creates a shared platform for all the contracting parties to implement the comprehensive or integrated coastal zone management. At the same time, the area-based planning is used as a go-to mechanism for the coastal zone management. And as a result, in 2017, another document was adopted, which is a conceptual basis for the integrated coastal zone management. Also now, we are broadly considering the concept of the maritime spatial planning, and there is a capacity building project that the State Hydrometeorological University is part of, and one of the main parts or roles for us is to develop the roadmap for the marine spatial planning. But I think it stands to reason to consider this legislation as part of a larger federal law on maritime activities in Russia. And we need to revitalize the idea to develop such a law, which would have contributed to a more efficient system of management of the maritime system as an important marine, environmental and economic component of the Russian Federation. Also, I need to mention here that this protocol on integrated coastal zone management in Mediterranean countries is a unique legal document of the whole international community, and the Mediterranean nations are proud of this fact, and they're prepared to share this best practice with other coastal countries. The text of this protocol is innovative, prospective, comprehensive, and integrated. Now, let's look at the coastal legislation in 3 southern European countries, which are Spain, Portugal, and Italy. We have selected these countries from southern Europe because this is one of the most popular regions visited by tourists, and a huge attention is paid in those countries to the integrated coastal zone management and also to the management of the quality of beaches and the protection of the coast area. Like, for instance, Spain is the country which invests the biggest funds into the improvement of their coastal line. The coastal area of Spain is strategically important, both socially and economically for the country, and can be subdivided into 5 macro coastal regions, which are characterized by their typical biodiversity in terms of climate and ecosystems. This is as far as Spain goes. In 1988, Spain adopted the so-called National Shores Act, which reaffirmed the state's ownership of the coast, which was necessary to protect coastal zones from negative impacts resulting from the development of activities on land adjacent to the sea areas. And the Coastal Act is based on the declaration enshrined in the Spanish Constitution that the coastal strip, beaches, territorial sea, and natural resources of the exclusive economic zone and the continental shelf are the property of the state. This Shores Act is the basis, administrative basis, for the regulation of coastal line in Spain, including beaches, along with other regional bylaws that regulates such aspects of beach area management as coast use plans, security issues, all sorts of services provided in coastal areas, which form the basis of the existing legal acts and general legislation on coastal management. Next would be Portugal. In Portugal, in 1993, the decree law was adopted to prepare special plans. They're called Planos de Ornamento de Orla Costera, which translates as coastal planning plans, which form the principal administrative framework for coastal area. And they're connected to a coastal protective zone with a maximum distance of 500 meters above the waterline and a marine protected zone of 30-meter horizon, but outside the area under the jurisdiction of ports. And the principal objectives of these POOC plans is the protection from erosion, regulation of use, improvement of the quality and value of beaches and coastal areas with good biological and geological heritage. And the third country would be Italy. Italy is lacking any overall national strategy to carry out a national ICZM program for the sustainable development of coastal area, which promoted the establishment of regional plans compensating the shortcomings on the national planning. In this regard, have been proposed different regional approaches to coastal management on a local scale, proceeding from northern to southern Italy. So among these leaders of the development of these regional plans are Veneto, Liguria, and Emilia-Romagna. Now, I would like to share with you a few of the case studies on the beach quality management. There is a need to describe this quality of beaches because their crowdiness and the stronger interest to coastal areas can lead to over wasting and the reduction of water quality and reduce the social and economic values of region in general. And the contribution of tourism to the economy of maritime economies largely depends on the landscape and quality of the provided services, and the successful beach management can improve the balance between human, economic, and social parameters of coastal zones. And the beach management is also an integral part of coastal zone management. As an example, here we have a case study on the assessment of beaches in Algarve region. This is the southern part of Portugal, one of the most popular tourism-wise. And here they were facing a number of objectives. First, to assess the quality of beaches. There were 5 types of beaches classified. Also, they had to properly manage their expectations and interests and preferences of users, because they take into consideration the opinions of the population is very important in the integrated coastal zone management, because public at large are play an integral part and role in decision making. Next slide, please. So here we see territorial location of this area on the south, in the southern part of the country, Algarve. So we have selected 5 beaches of different types, urban, rural, remote, and so on. And one of the principal methods of assessment of beaches was this methodology of BEAR, which assesses the swimming area in general and classifies this beaches by 5 types. And then by assessing them based on the main requirements in the 5 main priority questions causing concerns for beach users like safety, water quality, beach facilities and scenery, and level of waste, or level of contamination. And additionally to that, they have organized surveys among the beach users, a total of 250 questions, by which we found out their main preferences, expectations, and whether they're happy with the beach quality. I'm not going into too much of a detail of that because I don't have time for that. But if you are interested, I can have a separate presentation about that. Next slide. And similar matrices were drawn up about the importance and significance, which showed the principal priorities and room for improvement. We see the indicators which received low marks, and we need to maintain those indicators which received high level. Next case study would be Italy. For that, we have prepared a beach quality index, and we have selected a total of 2 groups of parameters with 4 indicators in each one of the groups. We have integrated the beach quality index, which is a single aggregate index grouped into 2 main components, which are nature status and recreation status, because it is very important when assessing beaches and coastal zones in general to assess not only the environmental values and characteristics, but also look at the recreational conditions like the safety, availability of required facilities, and so on. Next slide, please. Here you can see the integrated index components and the coefficient. Each parameter had its own weight, which was predetermined from the survey of experts, because depending on the type of the beach, different parameters could have bigger weight or lower weight. I can say that it is very important to classify beaches based on different types to make sure that we do not have a situation when more natural beaches would have high level of concern in terms of the development of tourism. We need to maintain natural characteristics as well, and for such beaches we'll have different set of requirements. In urban beaches, it's other type of story. It would be very hard to restore the natural characteristics. That's why the main goal and priority here would be to provide safety and good facilities to the beach users. And I think in Russia, it makes sense also to use the same type of classification by identifying different classes or types of beaches. And in my last survey, there was an article published recently from Hydrometeorological University, which is called Improvement of the Maritime Planning System as a Blue Growth Component. And here we had a proposal made on the structure of such an integrated model for maritime management. General principles of building such a model are listed here, which is the integrity of maritime activities, the speed of the use of coastal zones, and the active involvement of all the stakeholders into this, including general public at large, into the process of maritime management activities. The integral model is based on the organizational matrix structure based on linear connections, and this suggested model includes 4 subsystems, 4 specific systems like the integrated management, maritime spatial planning, macro region planning, and co-management. And this management is done within the framework of integrated 3-level models. Next slide, please. They are at the level of federal, regional, and municipal levels, and each integrated model includes all these different functions considering different decision-making levels. In case of implementation of such a subsystem called SMF, will have a proper integration level for the coastal zones into a single unit of governmental management. Then a specific maritime management functions include also all sorts of requirements, subsystems of macro regions. It helps us harmonize the regions of neighboring regions. And the 4th subsystem, called co-governance, is oriented at coordination of all the interests of all entities and actors at all levels of decision-making level to meet the requirements of the civil society and international community in general. That would be the end of my presentation. Sorry for being a bit over time.